Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It is wonderful to have you here for another episode of the show. Now my guest today is someone who I've been looking forward to talking to for a long time. My guest is Harry Moffitt, and Harry has an incredible pedigree and incredible background. He has been in the Australian Defence Force for over 30 years, and he retired some years ago, having spent most of that 30 years as a member of the Special Air Service, otherwise known as the SAS. So Harry has seen a lot, done a lot, and what he's been able to do is to translate the lessons of that really high performance environment that is the SAS to take those skills and knowledge from the battlefield to the boardroom, and is really going to be unpacking a lot about human performance, how to get the best out of ourselves, how to get the best out of our teams, the common traits that allow performers to do well day in, day out. And this is a really in-depth conversation with Harry. It's a wide-ranging, really interesting conversation. Harry's got a website called stotangroup.com.au and is the author of a great book called 11 Bats. And you can get a copy of that at Booktopia, or you can go to 11bats.com.au. But in this podcast, we talk a lot about the psychology of performance, and he shares a lot about the things that he's observed from others, as well as his own experience, that have really informed his view around how to get the most out of our own life, our own experience, and to maximize our effectiveness. So lots of really good things in this particular conversation. Now, if you're really looking to take your practice to the next level, if you really want to improve the performance of your business, then I'm going to encourage you to come along to the Savvy Dentist Facebook group. If you're a practice owner, this is a group just for you. This is where we're going to be sharing tips, tools, trainings to take your practice to the next level, whether it's earning more income, having more free time, or just enjoying that experience a whole lot more so you can have a rich and rewarding life. You're going to find plenty of insights, plenty of tools, plenty of things there to help you along that journey. But for now, let's get on to our conversation with Harry Moffitt. Here he is. Harry Moffitt, thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us all the way from Melbourne on this very cold morning. Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast.
Thanks, Jesse. Good to be here.
Mate, I've been looking forward to talking to you for quite some time. Your work is well known. You're the founder of the Stotan Group. You're the author of a book called 11 Bats. You've got lots of things going on, but your history is around being in the ADF for over 30 years, the Australian Defence Force, with many, many years of that being part of the SAS, or the Special Air Service as it's known. So before we get started, obviously you've seen a lot of things, done a lot of things, and I'd just like to say, firstly, before we get started, thank you for your service.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a wonderful thing that you've done for the country, and I just want to put that on the record up front and early. I'm always curious to ask, though, Harry, about history, backstories. Was it a linear journey? You know, since I was 3 years old, I wanted to go and join the SAS, or was it something a little more organic, like the rest of us, where it was a bit of zigging and zagging along the way? How did you find your way into the SAS? What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, well, the origin point really was, or the awakening moment, if you like, was when I was 12 years old, which is 1980. You may remember the Princess Gate Iranian hostage siege that occurred in 1980 in London. And that just was splashed all across the world, newspapers and on my black and white telly at home at the time. That image welded into my mind. I didn't know actually what it was at the time. I didn't have a clue what was going on. It's just these black-clad men swinging off ropes and onto a balcony. And that was what set me off on a journey, particularly of reading. I discovered reading, or developed a passion for reading out of that. And I read about all of the special forces units around the globe, and then discovered there was one here in Australia. You know, I'd read a lot about British SAS, US Green Berets and SEALs, the Israelis, the Germans, the French, etc., and then discovered that Australia had an SAS, and that was really what set it off. Up until then, Jesse, up until the age of 12, I was going to be running out of full forward for Hawthorn or opening the batting for Australia, which both were never going to come about. So it was timely.
Well, we did speak a little bit off air about both of us kind of vying for the number 11 spot on any batting order, mate. I reckon you're going to be ahead of me in the batting order, mate. I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, no, but my mate said I should have called the book Bats 11, not 11 Bats. which I thought was great.
Take that, yeah. So bat's 11, mate. I'm with you. I'll be batting 12. Anyway, you became fascinated, obviously, with all things related to special forces, and presumably that led to you thinking about, well, if I'm going to go down this path, how do I do that? You know, at some point you would have joined the army and gone through that process. I assume you joined the army first off, but what was that process like for you? How old were you when you join the army? What was that learning experience like? And then what was the journey into the SAS once you're in the ADF?
I clearly came to the realisation I'd need to join the army. These days, you don't necessarily need to. There's alternative pathways to the regiment. I joined the military in 1986. I joined the Signals Corps, which was fortuitous, really, because I learned a lot about communications at that stage, Morse code, which is another language, essentially, and all the communications methodologies that they used in the military, and the SAS is, because we operate very remotely, communications are a big part of what we do as a skill set. So 1986, I trained for 4 years. I sat SAS selection or attended SAS selection in 1990. And during that period, again, I came across some amazing role models. In one in particular, Percy Cerity, who was the trainer of champions here in Melbourne, changed high performance sports on its forever. He trained Herb Elliott and Dawn Fraser and a whole stable of champions. And I learned about physical training and my body and how to get stronger and bigger and faster. And I became interested in that. I learned about mental skills. Percy was talking about these things way before they're a thing. They're still not really a thing, mental skills training, and unless you kind of find it organically. So I trained mentally, prepared myself. And in 1990, I was ready. I felt like I went on the course quite young, but I felt confident. I felt competent. I was one of 150, one of 20 out of 150 to pass selection that year. And I was, I think I maybe scraped in at 19 or 20, but I was very happy to pass selection. And it's, as a lot of people are probably aware, a pretty tough month period to get through.
Yeah, I've got friends who have gone through that process, and one or two have been selected, but most have not. And they all say it's probably the hardest thing that they've encountered in terms of training and courses. Just coming back to Percy, though, because Percy is a bit of a eccentric figure in some ways when it comes to Australian sport. And I remember seeing a doco on Herb Elliott where Percy had Herb Elliott running up and down sand dunes, and long before it was, again, a thing to be running in sand to build up that resistance. He's a really important figure in Australian sports, but perhaps is not as well known as I believe he could or should be. What did you learn from Percy along the way? Obviously, you learned about how to get faster and bigger and all the rest of it, but what did you learn about yourself in that process?
So Percy was an enigmatic kind of figure, eccentric, divisive too. He was challenging the convention of the time in training and was very, I wouldn't say confrontational, but he wasn't backward in coming forward and sharing his thoughts. And that resonates with me. And I think it resonates with the SAS spirit too, because we look for disruptive people. We look for disruptive thinkers. We look for creative, people who are interested in, that kind of creative destruction, that, to think outside the box, right outside the box proper. And he was an outside the box thinker. There's no doubt about it. So great inspiration. I have him up there with, great men and women, Nancy Wake, David Sterling, of course, Albert Jacka, all disruptive people who changed the atmosphere and the game wherever they went. So Percy taught me, he taught me about, you need to learn about your body, and you need to learn just more than that it does things, muscle groups, bones, etc. So a bit of anatomy and whatnot, what it can do and what it should do, and that it's a natural thing. A bit about the mind, the structures of the mind. He turned my mind to things like even just memory and attention and focus and things like that. He brought them to me for the first time. He taught me about social psychology in a way, how teams of people train harder together and push each other and things like that. And that was better for you than training alone. And having a coach, he was known as the philosopher coach, is important. I do a lot of that now, the power of unlocking coaching. And the final and most important thing, Jesse, was that he taught me that the softer side of human performance. It's good. Yeah, things like mental health and well-being. He was onto this stuff way before anyone was really talking about it openly. He talked about philosophy, literature, the arts. He had his athletes down at SAS in his training camp at Portsea reading poetry and doing little assignments at night and things. So, and now we know that this professional development is another part of human performance that's really important and amplifies your work across physical and mental domains as well, psychological domains in performance. So it's a huge thing in, for example, AFL clubs. You know, they're undergoing a quiet revolution in some of the elite sports in terms of how they do professional development, education, you know, even philosophy, Stoicism. I'm glad to hear that is back. So, you know, I think that's what Percy gave me, and all of those things formed a great foundation for me as I aspired to and as I trained for SAS selection.
You've worked with Percy before your SAS selection course. You've obviously then been one of 20 people out of a pool of 150 people to get through, which is, again, really tough, really demanding. And I wanted to just talk to you a bit about life inside the regiment and then, of course, deploying, because it's one thing to train and train and train, but when you get onto the playing field, whether that is in a sporting sense, a business sense, or in your case, it's very much a war zone and going into those areas. What's that transition like from training to being ready for the real game, the real thing? What do you do to mentally prepare? What's the emotional experience you've gone through? Because one of the things I'm curious to ask is how your emotions, particularly fear, stress, all of those things can unravel people. How did you deal with all of that and still manage to perform at a really high level?
Yeah, well, I did spend a fair bit of time in a training mode. Australia was probably the best training military on the planet in the 80s and 90s because it's all we did was exercise. But making the transition to combat or to operational environments was exciting. And we, again, well prepared, confident, competent to carry out the mission with a steel-like focus on the mission. So there wasn't any time to kind of really reflect on how one was feeling or anything. And I should qualify too, I didn't train under Percy. I read all his books and his magazines and I just absorbed it all through Percy and visited Ceres. He was still kicking around at that time, but I think he was later stages of motor neuron disease and would have loved to have caught up with him. But yeah, so the 90s, we did a lot of training, a lot of preparation. And, in 2001, September 11, the game really changed. And we went into this cyclical roller coaster, if you like, of deployments for the next decade and a half. So, and as I said, going into war zones and then the next layer or the next level up, if you like, or out is into combat. We were ready. We were excited, small e excited, and prepared and really focused on our mission. And I think you touched on one thing there. People often ask about fear, and you're afraid. There's no doubt about it. It's impossible to hold back the psychophysiological response that you have in a setting like that where your life is is under threat. So, I think if you didn't feel something, you'd be bloody borderline psychopathic because you can't control your physiology. That it's set that way. We're deep in the brain. But what we do, and I think what I can say we are very good at, is training mentally for those moments when they arrive. Some simple things like remembering to breathe. There's a lot of literature around breathe like this, box breathing, monk breathing, hum. There's a whole bunch of different literature and thoughts on it. But the fact is that when you go into fight, flight, or fight kind of mode, when you go into those fearful, heightened arousal, high stress states, it's just to remember to breathe, to take deep breaths, because most of the time in those states, our breathing is a bit shallower, a bit more frequent, and your body's utilizing the oxygen in the blood in different ways. So to push back against that and force deeper executive function and decision making, and also get back your your fine motor skills. It's a whole part we could talk an hour on. Just remembering to breathe. I remember a friend of mine, and it was an older a more senior guy to me, told me about he would write breathe on his left-hand glove. And so when he had his gun up and potentially returning fire, just a memory jogger to take a deep breath, not because you're avoiding panic or deferring panic or anything, but just to get the executive functioning and decision-making, all those things that shut down when we're under high stress. So long-winded way of saying we prepare for those moments mentally. And I think, as in a game of football, early stages of a contact, whichever side seizes the initiative first and settles in first, if you like, generally has the better outcome for the day.
I wanted to ask you a bit about the ratio of training to competing, because you just spoke about you trained and you trained and you trained and you trained. And in business, there's not always the time, the luxury to train and train and train and train and train before you get out and you do your thing. So I wanted to ask you a bit about how you see modern organisations adopt a high-performance view around training so they can perform better, but within the realities of the fact that they've still got to turn a profit on a day-to-day basis.
I am gradually coming to a position on this. For example, we work with hedge funds and investment teams, and high pressure, highly reactive, in operational mode all the time, and there's very little respite for people to do training and professional development. There's a discipline in that, and that's it comes down to leadership, making professional and personal development the way we do business, unquote. What we can learn from high performance environments, be it NASA, who I think, you've got to be the most high performing organisation on the planet in both material and humans. I think it's the hardest selection course, certainly, they pick from 50,000 people down to about 20 every 4 years or something ridiculous like that. It's insane. If you borrow from those elite so-called high-performance organisations, what do we know about them is they have they have rigorous selection processes to go through. So you don't walk into an AFL team. You will have had to have trained and practiced for years to get to that point. They place a high emphasis on training and professional development, regardless of whether they're trapped in training all the time and only working and operational most of the time, or a small part of the time, sorry. We also know that high-performing teams concentrate on leadership as well. They place a high value on leadership training and mentoring within the team. So these sound like basic things. That those teams are brilliant at the boring stuff. They're brilliant at the basics. They get the basics right. In the SAS, people say, "Oh, what's the secret of the SAS?" I'll tell you what the secret is. It sucks. 90% of the time you're wet, hungry, tired, pissed off, bloody getting shot at. So it's it sounds good on the outside, but it sucks. That's our kind of joke on the inside. The secret, it really is that when everyone else is knocked off, we're doing an extra half hour or an hour. When everybody's laying in bed, we're out there sharpening our skills. And what does that mean? We're doing dry practices, hours of repetitions, practicing boring stuff, making sure things like all of our personal and professional administration is squared away so it doesn't impede or intrude and cause grief. Making sure our social networks and other things are all squared. All the basics of life and the skills maintenance are done so that when it does come time to perform, the old saying is train hard and fight easy. That's kind of the goal that we have. How that plays out in a business, I find my job often is to slow businesses down in part, and for them to understand that the world isn't going to collapse and fall in, and that sometimes we overweight and catastrophize outcomes rather than slowing down and being more deliberate about planning and strategy. And that's not an easy thing to do, because that's a multi-year, somewhat generational kind of shift that some businesses need. The businesses that we go into that have had long-term success, sustained success over a long period of time, these things matter to them. The selection processes are not, the old mantra, it's this hire slow, fire fast type of thing rather than the other way around. They place a premium on that. They pay their people really well. They don't overburden them and overload them with work any more than they would give anyway, because they're high performers. They place a premium on professional development. and most of that's self-explored, which is good. And they do help them with a work-life balance. They're inclusive in that way. So my final message would be to the leaders of those businesses is, what are you prepared to do what are you prepared to sacrifice to be a high-performance team? You can't just rock up and be a high-performance team. It takes sacrifice and hard work. That's the big characteristic. So it's a deeper discussion, and there's no easy fix. You don't just roll in Harry Moffitt and he'll sprinkle some dust on you and you'll be a high-performance team. That's not how it works. There's a fair bit of hard work, and it's a long-term project if that's what you want to be or be renowned for.
We're talking about creating long-term sustainable success. To build something that's sustainable takes time, it takes effort, it takes consistency over that time frame. In the world that we live in today, and again, I'm feeling like the grumpy old man in the front of the Muppets for a moment. Like the fast-paced social media world where it looks like everyone's getting everything instantly. There's instant success here and 6-minute abs and all of that kind of stuff. That I think that some people buy into the myth that there is a silver bullet or the magic dust or whatever. And what I'm hearing you say very loudly and clearly is it's hard work, not magic dust. Yeah,
it frustrates me too. And I think the pendulum, I just wrote a piece this morning or just drafting up a piece this morning, some reflections on, and I don't want to diss anyone or anything here because it's all good value, but the pendulum of health and wellbeing and resilience and those concepts, I think is swinging in danger of swinging too far. We are firm believers in mental health, wellbeing, physical, social wellbeing, 100%. We advocate that mantra. I'm also, resilience is a fantastic concept that we've all come to. It's help us grow as a species to understand and thinking of these things in a more sophisticated way. So, however, I think from a psychologist's perspective, there is a danger of learned helplessness or something of that order where we start to tell people enough and they see enough of, fix yourself this way and fix yourself that way and here's a better way to live and people start to think that they're missing something and that there's something out there for them. And there always is, of course. We're all on the same journey. However, life is tough. Life is hard. Your mind is always going to default potentially to negativity, and for some of us more than not. And we do have a tendency to overweight things, uncertainty. We're easily malleable when it comes to social media and FOMO and those types of things. So you've really got to check yourself. And that's why I like, the term for our company, Stotan, is Percy Cerutty's philosophy, but it's a portmanteau or a blended word, Stoicism and Spartan. They're old philosophies and old ways of being, and some of the practices are probably past their use-by date, but there's great virtues in Stoicism and there's great concepts in a Spartan life, understanding that, pulling your life back to some very basic and simple things to try and understand the world around you. So in Stoicism, I think, and in that type of philosophy, it's very handy to understand that, we can't be happy all of the time. The most of the time we can work towards being happy and creating moments of happiness and satisfaction. But for the most part, we need to struggle forward and move forward and onwards always, and that the answers aren't easy. And any easy answer, I would argue, is probably fraught in its pursuit.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Sometimes looking for a simplistic answer to a complex problem can lead people down a path that's not always helpful. So I 100% agree with that. And interesting, your reflections around Stoicism and Spartan. I didn't realise Stotan was a combination of those two words. So it's really good to understand. Something I've been thinking about. I turned 50 last year, and
congratulations!
Made it.
Half century.
Half century. Raised the bat, right?
That's right.
That's about the only 50 I'm ever going to score on the cricket field, mate. I can tell you that. That's the only time I'll get to raise that bat. But
not a bad 50 to make.
It's not a bad 50 to make. It's better than the alternative, isn't it?
Yep.
But I guess where I was going with that is, you do reflect as you get a bit older about some of the things that are important to you now that were less important or even not even on the radar 10, 20, 30 years ago. I wonder, in your experience as a psychologist, in which, again, I want to explore how that journey came about as well, but do people go through cycles of life where things come to the forefront of their mind as they go through different life milestones, or is this a journey that some people kind of really nail early on in life? Because personally, I feel like I'm a little bit late to the party of figuring out some of these things, I'm glad I've figured out some of them. I've still got a lot to figure out, of course, and it's never done. But I'm curious to understand whether there's ebbs and flows in life and different stages of life, and how that fits into high performance and building a well-rounded life as well.
Oh, that's a massive question, isn't it? I guess.
Sorry.
There's a lovely at the moment in the world of psychology, I guess Freudian psychologists make a little bit of a resurgence in parts that that the majority of who we are, and what will be forever is based in our childhood and some unconscious because you don't remember a great deal of up to the age of 7 generally. So there's something in that, So I think all the psychology, behavioural, cognitive, all the different parts have all got something right. But and it goes to the point that it's such a massive area we still haven't got our head around it. But there's a nice little framework. I think it's Bloom's framework, if I'm not mistaken, about the developmental stages of life. And, you can just Wikipedia. I'm pretty sure it's Bloom's 7 stages of development, life development. And I love that. It's a beautiful little framework. It has some elegant definitions, and it leads to exactly your point, Jesse, that as we do age, our awareness, if we choose it to be, our awareness just naturally expands, and we zoom out. Again, I qualify that because some people it doesn't. Some people have a way of thinking that kind of makes the lens zoom in rather than out. So if you're open to a life of self-discovery, of understanding that we know nothing, because I think that's one thing as you get older, you realise how much you don't know. It's like travelling. The more you travel, the more you want to travel, and the more you realise you'll never be able to see it all, and that can possibly frustrate you, or it can be numinous, if you like. But things are changing so quickly, it's impossible to keep up. I think sometimes you might feel like you're missing out on something, or you've missed something, when really it's not that long ago but there was a collective consciousness about it. You look at neuroscience, and they've turned that into all kinds of commoditized workshops and books, etc. It's still only very, very nascent, very new to all of us, and it's an exciting area, but we don't know a great deal about it. And you're in danger of kind of feeling like you need to know more, and you're not quite sure which direction to go in. I would say to that is go inwards. And the journey that I won't say late to, but I've always been conscious of, probably from my mid-20s, late 20s, is trying to defeat the barriers inside me so that my zoom is wider, so I can capture more and be open to more. I think that's a key point. If I have a takeaway, it's really looking inwards. And I don't want to sound like a Buddhist monk or anything like that, because I'm not religious or spiritual in that way. But I think the barriers to us seeing and absorbing and experiencing the world are in us. And in psychology, my path to psychology really is a natural extension of that kind of thinking. I was interested in how do we constrain our thinking and our experience of the world, and how can we zoom out? Because I think once you're open to life and open to anything, and open to the fact that you're probably wrong, or at least you are for the next 5 years till someone proves you wrong, that's a great comfort to me. That stoic virtue of, we're in a universe, we're not that important. The universe isn't designed and created for us here in the corner of the Milky Way. I think there's some comfort in that as a theme for life.
I 100% agree with you. I've had many of those thoughts, and the older I get, I realise the less I know, and I hold on to ideas less tightly than I did when I was in my 20s. In my 20s, I knew a lot, right?
That's right. You knew everything.
Knew everything, right? It was black or white. And now I see shades of grey, many more than 50. I'll just throw that out there. So I've often had that thought that, Jesse, you're really a bag of atoms walking around in a sea of atoms. And I had a particular moment. It was not that long ago. I was down at the beach, and I just had this really weird epiphany that the sea was rolling in, and whether I was there or not, the sea was rolling in and rolling out, and whether I cared or not, it was still going to roll in and roll out. And I think, again, to your point, it does give you a great deal of comfort, because it makes you realise, or at least it made me realise, that some of the things I was worried about or concerned about in the scheme of things weren't such a big deal, and it gave me a good opportunity to let go of some things. And
a lot of what makes us frail and scared and unknowing and fragile is that we don't understand death, and we're afraid of death, and that's as a species almost, we haven't come to the sophisticated stage. We're an evolving species, not an evolved one. And so, again, just to double down on the fact that one of the big fears, or one of the big issues we have with it, is that we know that we look around as we get older and we go, my mate died the other day. He was one of the best humans that ever walked the planet, yet the world has just absorbed it and moved on. And in fact, I forgot about it too a week later, and I feel guilty because a good mate of mine passed on. And hold on, when I go, isn't everyone going to stop? And everyone go, oh, we lost Harry, but they won't. No. 50 to 100 people will turn up to the funeral. Hopefully a few of them cry and wish me back. But the bus goes on. You get on, buy a Coke, sit down, have a ride for a while, and then get off, and nothing else matters, So again, the Stoic virtues, I find great comfort in that knowledge, just saying, okay, well, that's it. So while I'm on the bus, let's make every moment count. Let's find ways to defeat our, the thinking that we bring to kind of can be self-defeating at times. Add value to your lives, and even more purposefully add value to the people around you. As you're going. Yeah. Is this too deep for
No, mate, I'm enjoying this.
Great, yeah.
Psychology. That's not the normal career path for an SAS soldier. What was the impetus? It sounds like a continuation of a journey. How did you make the transition out of the ADF and into that space, Harry? Because that's a interesting journey in itself.
Yeah, well, I was always interested. I really started in earnest in a cot in Iraq, in Baghdad, in 2003. I had a 6-month deployment to Iraq. I just continued. I didn't go to uni, but I was going into psychology, and I just turned right and went to the recruitment agency instead. At that stage, the journey was right then. So it was a continuation on just with a bit of intrigue and interest in psychology and a growing interest in philosophy. And then in 2008, I was wounded in action in Afghanistan in an IED ambush, and in which a very good colleague of mine, Sean McCarthy, was killed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a tragic day, but that's how it goes, unfortunately. And I was repatriated back to Australia, and I spent a number of weeks on a PIC line and recovering from injuries and infections, etc. And during that time, it really struck me. The doctor came into the hospital bed one day and said, we might have to amputate your leg because the infection was getting out of control. And so, there was a kind of nothing steals the mind than a doctor announcing something like that. And it struck me that it could all be over, in a heartbeat. I'll lose my leg, I'll lose my career, and that's all I've given into. And I had a realization that I had put it all on red. And I didn't really have another string to my bow. And that was when I said, that's it. What would I do as a plan B? I'll throw everything into studying and become a psychologist. It was kind of the nearest opportunity to me. And it made sense because I was interested and et cetera. So that really was where it became a SAS type goal. It became kind of welded onto my mind, and that's what set about. And so I continued studying through till 2019. I left the regiment, came to Melbourne for a couple of years, finished my master's and research projects, thesis, etc., and qualified as a psychologist. And now I practice. I don't do clinical. I'll leave that for probably later in my life. I'm probably still a bit ginger myself from my career to venture down hardcore clinical psychology, but it's something I will do eventually. But at the moment, I concentrate on, as I said, human performance, organisational, social kind of psychology. That's what I would say. I'm as a general psychologist.
And cricket.
Yeah. I was out to dinner last night with the Bushrangers,
nice.
Buck Rogers, and so it was great to tell a few, cheeky cricket stories in front of potential Australia. Well, there were Australian cricketers in the room, so it was cricket's never far away, Jesse.
Oh, mate, well, I'm with you on that. So you are also the author of the book 11 Bats. So tell us a little bit about the book and how that came to be and the stories involved in the book.
At the end of I hung up the helmet and gun. I was too old. I batted quite deep in my SAS career. Very fortunate. My body held out and hopefully did all the right things. And I hung my helmet up in 2015. That was when they kicked me out of the teams as I was too old. I was 47 years old, so pretty old. And I decided I've been a mad journaler all my life. I've journaled since I was young, and I kept journals all through my military career. And I decided I needed a circuit breaker. So I went to England for 3 months. My wife begrudgingly gave me 3 months away, and I went there and wrote. I just wrote and wrote, tried to remember all of the stories, all of the feelings. I pulled my journals out with no intention of writing a book. I just knew that it would be a cathartic, therapeutic experience at the end of 25 years with the SAS and all the deployments, etc. I followed the ashes around. I took a room above a pub in a place called Wargrave, and I wrote and walked and wrote every morning. And then when I came back to Australia, I was approached. I had the 11 bats. Literally all the deployments I went on, I took a cricket bat, had played cricket while I was over there, and had the people I served with sign the bats. So I've got this odd collection of cricket. I think they're a wonderful collection of cricket bats. They were in the Shrine of Remembrance in the Australian War Museum, and a couple of publishers saw them and approached and said, we'd like to do a book. And I said no to the first couple that came through, but I met Tom Gilliott. He flew down from Sydney and he bought me enough red wine to convince me that it was a good idea. And he also partnered me up with Malcolm Knox, who's a great cricket writer, great Australian cricket writer, and a little bit of a disruptive thinker himself, Malcolm. I like the way he thinks. And he basically became I was basically a PhD. I wrote the biggest thesis and pulled it all together from all my stories, and we put it all together. And that was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I can't wait to do it again. I really enjoyed the meaningfulness and the mission of getting up every morning and writing. I love it. And when you're in that flow for a week or so in a row, it really focuses the mind. And so that was the route towards writing the book. And I'm so glad it's been well received. I think we'll go through 30,000 sales soon, which I understand's very credible. So I couldn't be more humbled and chuffed that it's gone well. And it's not a tell-all of the SAS. I think it's just an honest yarn about a bloke and his family and the challenges of that kind of lifestyle for both a bloke and his family.
Where is the best place to grab a copy of the book? Is it? I know there's 11bats.com.au. Can they get it on Amazon or bookstores, or where's the best place? Yeah,
it's available all fine web sites, Booktopia and Dymocks and everywhere else. It's still available in many bookstores. Most airports are still stocking it, so it's held up for a couple of years now, which is great. But I always point to Booktopia. They're the main providers of the book. But you can get on that through Amazon. Overseas, it's available. It's picking up sales in India, UK, and the US. So it's getting a kind of bit of a second life. We'll see how that goes. But
maybe we'll need to do the follow-on. Boom, boom.
Maybe. I'd be happy to. I'd love to get into India. I've been to watch Test match cricket there, and it's a brilliant place to watch Test match cricket. That's a whole of life experience. You just don't roll up and watch 6 hours of cricket or whatever. You immerse yourself in the cricket. It's the cricket utopia, I reckon. India, they take barracking and supporting to a whole new level.
I've not been to India to watch cricket. I went to the Ashes in 2005.
Yep.
I was at Edgbaston when we lost.
Yep.
But I on my to-do list, my bucket list is definitely Test cricket in India, because cricket it's a religion almost in India, isn't it? I mean, it's a way of life.
Yeah, and if Australia are playing, for example, India in Bengaluru, at the Shinnaswamy Stadium, waking up to cricket on the radio, cricket out the front on the street. It's on everywhere. It's just an immersive experience that I haven't had before. And I've travelled a fair bit to watch Test match cricket. In fact, that's my retirement plan, is to earn enough money so I can travel the world watching Test match cricket.
Oh, mate, I'll see you on that plan. I'll be there with you.
Yeah, good.
Harry, you've been really generous with your time, mate. If you could have your top 3 cricketers around for a barbecue and have a bit of a yarn, have a bit of a chin wag, who would you choose?
Oh, okay. That's a big one. I'm going to say off the bat, good question. I'm going to say I'd have to have Warnie there.
Yep.
Great Victorian. And I think my sense of Shane Warne is he was a top bloke. Keith Miller.
Yeah.
Although I don't think he was much of a family man, I'm probably in danger of out overreaching there. I have a few squabbles with his. I love his attitude to cricket. I think it's wonderful, and particularly service cricket and an ex-serviceman. And I'm intrigued by Tibby Cotter. I've always had he died in the charge of Beersheba or at Beersheba, carrying he was a stretcher bearer. He said he wouldn't carry a gun, but he wanted to go with his mates. I think he played 20 tests maybe for Australia, took 100 poles or 80 poles, I think. He's renowned at the time as being the fastest bowler in the world.
Wow.
But again, just a guy I've grown up intrigued with. That's not to dismiss some of the great international cricketers. I'm not choosing Australia just because, but they're 3 guys that I got a wonderful line of questions for all 3 of them, and I'd love to know more about them and as the man.
Well, mate, I reckon that'd be a fantastic barbecue. And I tell you, if that group ever got together, I'd be nagging you for an invite. I can tell you that. Harry, once again, mate, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us on our podcast. Ladies and gents, if you want to find out more about Harry, please go to his website, stotangroup.com.au. You can find out a whole heap about the work that he does around human performance. There's some articles there. There's some really cool things, not to mention other bits and pieces around the 11 Bats book as well. Do yourself a favour and grab a copy of that. But Harry, more than anything, mate, I just want to say thank you, not just for your time today. Thank you once again for your service and allowing us to get some insights into the way your world works and the lessons that have come from that. So it's been a real thrill to talk to you today, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Same to you, mate. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessegreen.com and download the free report.